What's up, everybody? So they're finally here, the dev workshops that we've all been waiting for. One that we knew was coming with the ranged weapon buffs and some melee nerfs, and a couple kind of big surprises. Parazon rework and some Helminth changes, Helminth additions rather. So I'm really excited about all of this. I understand that with Sisters of Parvos coming and them wanting to do a simultaneous release of that patch, they weren't able to add these changes to the test cluster. I do think that they're kind of underutilizing that resource a bit. I did ask DE about that. And Marcus responded to a Reddit thread I made, and he kind of gave those reasons about the simultaneous release, which is unfortunate. It would be nice if people could give feedback on this kind of stuff before it was basically in a patch. Um, but we'll see what they have in store for us. I've read through all the workshops. Overall, I'm actually pretty excited for Sisters of Parvos. It doesn't look like Melee was hit too hard. I think Melee will still be very strong. Melee was just absurdly broken. So I think that the small nerfs that they made are not going to be nearly enough to knock Melee down. I think the Parazon changes are kind of actually interesting. It's they've buffed the Parazon enough that I might actually think about using it, which is fresh. And the Helminth changes are super cool. I'm really excited about those. The invigorations they're adding are sound awesome. Um, and I do really hope that there's some changes, good changes to the Lich system along with these Parazon changes because I think that, at the end of the day in Warframe, like, if you're playing Warframe, you love the combat, you love the flow, you love the abilities, like, it's a really fun game to play, but it kind of feels bad when you don't have something to do that's meaningful, that's a good investment of your time. So, for me lately when I play Warframe, I'll do my daily sortie, I'll do my steel path incursions, maybe run a couple relics, and those all feel good because they're giving me something. Even as an MR30 player, all that stuff is still worthwhile. I still want, Umbral Formula for my favorite frames or, to make some plat from relics or whatever. So I think the Lich system could be a really huge addition to that. It's fallen a little flat so far. It's gotten better over time, but I'm really hoping it, becomes a solid addition to the game with Sisters of Parvos, because it'll be good for Warframe, and so I'm excited about that. To go over the melee and range changes real quick. So we do have a few changes. So I honestly thought that this was going to get nerfed a lot more. If I'm going to be completely honest, I really, really thought that it was going to be nerfed way, way more than it ended up being. Um, so that was pretty cool. They did nerf it a little bit, so I think everybody saw that coming, right? I don't think anybody didn't think that they were going to not nerf melee at all. Um, Melee is just so insane, right? Especially if you're using like an optimized melee output, it's just like broken, right? Especially slash. Now, one thing I am very surprised about, extremely surprised that they didn't touch slash or viral. I am shocked. I was almost 100% sure that they were going to nerf slash and viral. Because part of the reason why melee is so busted is because it is by far the best in the game at abusing the hell out of slash procs. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is with some of the additions to primary weapons that they're making, I could see a world in which primary weapons become almost as good as melee weapons at stacking up slash damage, which is, I mean, that for end game, like really high content, that's the name of the game, right? There are some primary weapons right now that can perform that well, and even some secondaries. The Trumna, have taken the Trumna into hundreds or thousands of level enemies in Steel Path, it can still kill stuff. It's a pretty beastly weapon. Problem is, most ranged weapons can't do that. Um, so let's get into the melee changes, then we'll talk a little more about ranged weapons. So they have this weird hard-on about attack speed. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really get it. I don't. There's like no meta melee builds that run more than one melee attack speed mod. It's just like not really a thing. Because you have condition overload, blood rush, primed reach, your two viral mods, weeping wounds, organ shatter, and then your attack speed mod, which is nearly always berserker, sometimes primed fury. Depends on the build, right? Now, some people don't run any elements on their slash melee, which is that's actually like the highest damage build, because then you can include stuff like Bane mods, maybe spring-loaded blade, maybe, I don't know, whatever. But very rarely are those two flex slots with viral, they're almost never more attack speed, because people have stuff like Arcane Strike, Warcry, or other attack speed buffs like Gauss. Like, I don't really understand why they are on this weird kick about like Berserker stacking with Fury. I don't think anybody does that. I mean, like, unless maybe a whole bunch of low MR people are doing that or something, but everybody I know that does Steel Path, nobody does that. So I'm really not sure where they're. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe they have more data than I do. I think the biggest nerf here, like changing it from on crit to on kill, is kind of whatever. I mean, it's okay. Like, I mean, melee kills stuff super fast. I think this will kind of make really slow melee feel kind of bad. So, especially when you're trying to build up your combo counter, if anything, this might make heavy attack melee feel a lot better, because heavy attack melee don't usually run Berserker. You can generally get enough attack speed from either, the combination of Killing Blow and Amalgam Organ Shatter, where you don't really need attack speed on heavy attack weapons. Now, I personally will probably be using the Pennant even more, because the Pennant has that awesome passive where when you get heavy attack kills, you get an attack speed bonus that can stack up crazy high, and it's a super fun weapon. So I'm probably going to be using that even more than I already do. I think by far the biggest nerf here is the timer. So 10 seconds versus 24 seconds. 10 seconds is like actually not that long. I could see a world where people start using Prime Fury instead of Berserker. Just because this might actually be annoying enough where people don't want to use Berserker, or Berserker Fury as it's called now. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that this might actually push Berserker out of the meta. I think it might make Prime Fury better, which kind of sucks, right? Because Prime Fury is a login reward. I don't have Prime Fury. I'm an MR30 player, and I don't have Prime Fury. I took Prime Shred and then Prime Vigor because I wanted that for Hildren, and I never got Prime Fury because Berserker exists. So frankly, I think that this kind of sucks for a lot of players, because you can only get those mods. It's over 3 months until you can get those mods again. So, or every 200 login days. So it's like, or I'm sorry, 6 months. So that's a pretty long time. So I don't know. I'm really not sure about this, honestly. It's I don't know if this is really a good change for the game. I would have much rather them just lower this to like 60% and kept it at the longer timer. I feel like this is almost like making this mod annoying to force people to not use it. I think when you have like really high enemy density, like in Steel Path, it'll still be fine. But I guess people would use Quickening instead of Fury, which is 40%. Which honestly, Quickening might just be better. I mean, because you get the extra combo, and It's just passive. You don't have to like stack anything up. I think honestly, quickening might just be better to use. Um, so the blood rush changes. So the biggest thing here will be you can't like as they say here, you won't be able to get red crits as often. Why is this important? Well, actually, both of these changes are kind of coupled together. So slash procs are just totally broken. Slash doesn't scale off your elements. So what do you want for slash? You want base damage as for melee. The two ways that you can make your well, three are base damage, crit chance and damage, and faction damage like Bane mods, right? So Bane mods recently got nerfed where they don't double dip anymore. So that's one nerf to slash. Now they're nerfing both Condition Overload and Blood Rush. So slash procs from melee are going to be doing a lot less damage. Now, I don't think that this is going to be enough to make like Cronin Prime bad. I just don't think that that's going to happen. Because, and I think that that goes back to their overall approach in making these changes. So, because they're doing all of this based on mods, and they were vehemently opposed to making any weapon-specific changes, except for glaives, but this is really more of like a overall glaive change than specific weapons. Anyways, so weapons that used like a blood rush, condition overload, weeping wound setup are still going to use those, right? And the melee weapons that were not super great are still going to be shit, right? And the same thing goes for the primary weapons. Like because they're making it so that they're augmenting primary and secondary weapons through these new arcanes and through mods, the bad weapons are still going to be bad. If anything, they're actually going to be even worse in comparison because Warframe does everything based off of a weapon's base stats, right? So like if you have a mod or I'm not like super excited about that. I do really wish that they had gone through and adjusted some of the primary and secondary weapon base stats like they did with melee weapons in Melee 3.0. Perfect example, Dara Vandal, right? Beautiful looking weapon. Looks amazing. So cool. One of my favorite looking weapons in the game. Practically unusable. All it has is like a okay status chance, garbage crit chance, horrible IPS distribution. You cannot use that weapon in a difficult mission like Steel Path. It doesn't matter what ranged mods they add. That weapon is going to be shit, right? So like I don't understand why they wouldn't just make some changes to some of the ranged weapon base stats. All these changes are going to do is make melee go from god tier to A tier and bring up the ranged weapons that were already really strong, like the Trumna or Kuva Brahma or whatever, right? So in principle, I like a lot of the things they added. I think it gives people more flexibility. I don't think the melee nerfs are too bad. But I do wish that they'd taken a look at some of the ranged weapons. So from what I can tell, like this looks really crazy, but I believe that this is only changes to the quick throw damage. I think if you're doing a full heavy attack throw, that this won't you won't see a change in damage. And I think that because glaives, a heavy attack glaive, you're going to be using Amalgam, Organ Shatter, and Killing Blow most likely. I don't think that this is like a huge deal. And honestly, glaives do so much damage that I don't even think this matters that much. Um, I thought that they were going to either reduce the radius of glaive explosions or reduce or give them fall off, because that was one of the biggest buffs that glaives got, was they took away their damage fall off. So glaives do full damage everywhere. So I don't really think these glaive changes are huge. Kuva Nucor, if anybody is surprised about this, I will be shocked. This weapon was meta defining, absolutely busted. Pro tip: throw some, just put some punch through on your Kuva Nucor. You won't even notice this because you should really either be using a Kuva Nucor for if you're using it for damage, you're probably going for headshots to get the crazy crit multipliers. In which case, you're single targeting down enemies anyways because the chains aren't hitting headshots. Or you're using it for status, in which case you should have no damage mods on it, and you should only have status mods, and you can afford to include some punch through. So my Kuva Nucor status setup, I have the punch through mod, which I forget what it is for secondaries, and I also have punch through on my Riven, which actually does increase the number of chains you get. So I don't think I really even noticed this very much. I mean, yes, it is a little bit of a nerf, but they could have nerfed this way, way, way more. Like, this could have gotten a way bigger nerf. So honestly, I think the Kuva Nuker got off pretty easy. I think the idea of the primary and secondary weapon arcanes is really cool. One of the things I like about Warframe is it's like, man, I really like this particular weapon. I love the, Cernos Prime, and you can put like a catalyst in there. You can put all these forma. You can get a Riven for it. If you really like a weapon, you can really doll that thing up and kit it out, and that kind of feels good. It's like, yeah, my Cernos Prime is sick, right? Like, it just destroys stuff. I went out and I got a Riven for it, and I farmed the Kuva and whatever. So now Rivens is a whole different conversation. I actually don't really like Rivens, to be honest, but I think the ability to add arcanes onto a weapon is actually pretty cool. And from looking, so I'm just going to go through the primary ones because the secondary ones are like the exact same, just for secondaries. So I think that their idea is, and they say it down here. So ultimately each arcane stacks up to the same amount of damage, but it's how you choose to get there, right? So in essence, really, these are all adding a whole bunch of extra damage to your primary weapon. And that's why I was saying that between these buffs and the new galvanized mods and the nerfs to melee, primary weapons, high crit primary weapons, might actually become the go-to slash weapons. There is a world in which that happens. I mean, there's a lot of primary weapons that can already do that pretty well. They just can't scale as high as melee because of condition overload and because of blood rush. So without the consistent red crits on melee, and you have to remember, crit chance for ranged Rivens is a lot better than crit chance on melee Rivens because of Blood Rush. So Blood Rush was devaluing anything else that was crit based. So with all this extra damage, maybe ranged weapons can actually compete. Maybe primaries can compete. Secondaries, I think, are going to have a little bit of a harder time because they kind of need to use hemorrhage to get slash procs. Or they just need to be innately really good at doing slash damage. So, like, for example, I can't wait to try some of these out on Akjagara Prime. That weapon is a beast. That is probably one of the most underrated secondary weapons in the game. Akjagara Prime is a slash producing monster. Right? I run like a pure slash build on there, and it just destroys 180 heavy gunners in the similar realm and in missions. So putting some of these on there, ooh, it's going to be really nice. I actually am so excited for this reload speed one. I hate reloading my weapon. I love the mods that let you reload while your weapon is holstered. So I am putting this on Shrumna so fast. So I'm really excited for both of these, honestly. I think it's really cool to, like, try to get headshots and stuff. and it'll be really nice to get that, bonus for having that playstyle. Overall, I like these arcanes. I think they're really good, and I do think that they could change the game. I do think that they're bringing ranged weapons much closer to melee. How close that gap, or how much that gap gets closed, we won't really be able to tell until we test things out. Now there's these galvanized mods, so I think these are very interesting. I think if you're running a Warframe that can help your weapon get kills with their abilities, so this is almost like stacking up Blood Rush or something, right? So I think that it's interesting that they went for this on kill approach. And man, look at this galvanized scope. Like, that's a lot of crit chance. Like, we could see, imagine something like a Batacore with this galvanized scope and getting a headshot with your alt fire. Like, we're talking red crit territory, especially if you have a Riven. Like, that's juicy. Um, I really want to try this beam length. I love the Phantasma. It's one of my favorite weapons. So I think these galvanized mods are actually pretty cool. It's like kind of an interesting way of almost implementing something like Blood Rush or Condition Overload. Especially, like I said, if you have a way to help get those kills with your frame. Now, one thing I'm really worried about is, like I've mentioned Slash a couple times. Slash is really good. There are some things that have on-kill trigger effects that only trigger from the actual damage, not from any status effects produced by that damage. So a really good example would be Arcane Pistolier. For Arcane Pistolier, you can only trigger that off of the actual damage from the bullet. If it causes a slash proc and the slash proc kills them, you cannot proc that arcane, right? So I'm a little worried that these mods might be much more, or might be very unreliable unless they've thought about that interaction. Because let's be real, like most of the time people are stacking up there are very few weapons in Warframe that are good just by doing direct damage. Probably the only one that comes to mind is like Stropha and maybe Fragger Prime. Everything else has like slash procs, you can stack heat procs or something, right? Um, so I hope that they've thought about that. I really, really do. Otherwise, these mods might not be as good as I'm wanting them to be. They're giving people a whole bunch of like login rewards for if they meet these conditions. That'll be cool. I think I'm pretty sure I qualify for all of these, so it'll be nice. The Forma booster, that'll be great. So overall, I'm hoping that this Berserker change isn't like too bad. Worst case scenario, you just switch to using quickening. I think melee will still be fine, and I do think ranged weapons, especially with these arcanes, I'm so looking forward to this. This is going to be nice. I think people will be able to get much more out of playing with their primary weapons. For the Parazon, so I actually think the Parazon changes are pretty interesting. Being able to execute enemies at much higher percentage health, because like when you even when you're even when you just like start a Steel Path mission, like heavy units can be pretty annoying to kill. Even if you have a good build, like some of these units are actually pretty annoying. So being able to execute those, and I'm really looking forward to being able to actually think about my Parazon mods. Because right now, like I don't give a shit about my Parazon mods because I never do Parazon finishers ever, right? Like so um especially like this impact thing. Like maybe impact won't be terrible. Like that I think impact will still be terrible. I'm just going to be honest. I do think that it's not going to be good, but you never know. Maybe. Plus, I think there's some really cool Parazon mods. This is really interesting. I am very curious if when you revive them, they have. So first of all, I wonder if there's a cooldown on this. Second, I wonder if their regen or primed regen will be reset. So if you revive them with hard reset, will they be able to self-revive 3 times with primed regen, or once they die again, they're dead? Because that'll have a really big impact on how good this is. If their primed regen gets reset, I think this is actually pretty legit. So that's kind of cool. Especially if you're running a frame with like CC or something that can kind of keep your companion alive for a little bit. That'll be really sweet. These ones are kind of poo-poo. I'm gonna be honest. I don't really ever see, like, maybe this one might be okay, but I think that this sphere could actually be kind of cool. You know, CC can be nice, especially if you're in like a group of enemies and you want to do a finisher on heavy guy. Power drain, pretty interesting. I think people are always anything that can give you more ability strength if can always have an impact because there's so many builds that try to min-max your strength. So anything, and especially because it's 100%, right? It's guaranteed. So I think that can be kind of cool. So it's like I don't think it's called energy conversion, but whatever the one mod is, where when you get a regen or an energy globe, you get more strength. Um, so yeah, that could be cool. So I think overall, like, do I think I don't think like Parazon killing enemies is gonna be like the meta or anything. I don't think that's gonna be a thing. I do think it might be something you actually think about doing in a mission, and they do look kind of cool. So I'm glad that they buffed it. It was kind of funny that they had to buff it this much to make it worth using, but hey, more variations in gameplay. I think one thing I think at the heart of it, what they're trying to do with these changes is giving people more options, right? And more options gives players more agency, and that always feels really good in games, right? When you have agency to decide what you do, it just feels great. So, props to them for doing that. Helminth. Oh man, I am like super duper excited for this. So the Helminth abilities that they're adding. So for Helminth, they're adding a few abilities, and then they're adding this totally new thing called invigorations. I think some of these are actually kind of cool. This one is kind of weird because Titania's Spellbind is already a thing, and it does the same exact thing as this, and it can also CC enemies. So I'm not really sure, like, this is gonna have to have, like, a really long duration or something to be useful, I think. Otherwise, you would just use Spellbind. Um, Immunity to status effects is kind of an overlooked buff, because that makes it basically gives you primed sure-footed. When you're status immune, you can't be knocked down or CC'd or anything. That counts as a status effect in Warframe. So I run some builds where I have status immunity and I don't have to run primed sure-footed, and that makes your build way more flexible because that mod takes up a ton of capacity. You have to forma your Exilis, so it's really nice to be able to use a different Exilis mod like preparation or something that has nice quality of life. Those are the two that I really use the most, primed sure-footed and preparation. More armor is like meh. I think like, I think they're trying to give frames that use health tanking a little more oomph. Um, However, two of the frames that could use this don't have shields. Inaros and Nidus, which are the two, the 2 frames that you would tank with your HP, they don't have shields. So the only frames I could really see using this on that have shields and high armor are like, or that would want to take damage on their health and they have shields, are like Valkyr and Grendel. But Grendel's passive already gives him armor, and Valkyr has Warcry and so much base armor that it's kind of just, you know, too much. So I don't think this is going to be good at all. This one could be good depending on, you know, its duration and stuff. This one is interesting. I think like if you play in a group, this could be cool. You know, maybe like Anaros would use this or something. This is kind of interesting. Especially like duplicated with fresh timers. So, you know, sometimes you can have your slash procs like fall off. And slash does so much damage. Like I could see maybe doing this with like Grendel or something. Like you have enemies in your gut, you spit them out, and like you know, all the ticks of your toxin dot wouldn't quite kill enemies, but if you refresh it, maybe it would or something. I use Fire Blast on Grendel right now, which I think is just way better, but um, I think that maybe this might get used. I don't know. This is really sweet for people. I know that like it's super annoying for people to scan curias, and I know a lot of people like to collect all this stuff. So I actually think this is the best one that they're adding, honestly, because it's really nice. You know, throw this on Avara or whatever your hunting frame is of choice, and it'll make it a lot easier to get that stuff. Now, last thing, and the thing I'm most excited about, invigorations. I am so excited about this. So, for a long time, I used to love doing arbitrations. It actually used to be my favorite thing that I did in Warframe. And I made a lot of plat off selling, adaptation and all those mods, and I loved arbitrations. And then shield gating got added, and I think it was a combination of me just being really burned out on arbitrations and the drones having shield gating, which I absolutely hated. And I just got super burned out on arbitrations and I stopped doing them. But one of the things I loved about Arby's was that you could look and it's like, oh, this random frame that I haven't used in a while has the buff. Let me, whip that out. And you could make some really funny builds, and it was really cool. And I always thought, man, it would be awesome if they expanded on this system and like added different arbitration type missions for the other syndicates that would give different buffs. Like instead of just strength, you could have efficiency or range or whatever. So that's basically what invigorations are, except it's not tied to a specific mission. So I think this is so cool, especially if you're somebody that like likes to mess around with builds. It's amazing. Like be like, "Oh man, like, this build only works if I can get these particular stats, and just because of how the mods are in Warframe, that's impossible." Well, you might get an invigoration that makes that possible. Or it kind of gives you incentive to just try a totally new build just for that week to mess around with on some random frame. So, like with this this Excalibur one, like you could totally drop all your efficiency on your build. That frees up like, 1 to 2 mod slots depending on what your build was. And that could, you could change stuff up, maybe throw some augments in there that you've never used before, like stuff like that. So I think that's really cool. I'm really glad that they're doing this. I think it's like will really, really freshen up Warframe. I am personally um, extremely excited about this, especially this part where for every 10 invigorations you do, you'll be able to select which Warframe, I think that should be which, receives the next buff. That's really cool. So I would love, like, obviously, like, I love Mag, right? I would love to see like secondary crit chance on mag or something like that, just for the memes. And if I can, kind of control the RNG a little bit, that's awesome. Plus, it gives people a little bit more, at least some motivation to go do Deimos, which I haven't been to Deimos in months. So I think overall, I was kind of surprised how much I liked the changes. Invigorations are super cool. Really looking forward to the new ranged mods and arcanes. I think that's really interesting. I think going the arcane route was actually really smart because there's already so many mods that are kind of locked in on ranged weapons. And between that and them adding these new galvanized mods, which are going to kind of replace those, there weren't really there just wasn't a mod slot like available for new mods. So going about it with arcanes was a really good idea, I think, and kind of circumvented that problem. So it's just straight up power creep for ranged weapons and slight nerfs for melee weapons. So overall, maybe they're going to be pretty close. You never know. And these, the Parazon and Helminth stuff's pretty cool too. So I'm really looking forward to Sisters of Parvos, especially to get those sweet, sweet new ephemeras. Really, really excited about that. Some really cool new weapons coming. I really like the lore of Parvos and all that, so I'm very excited. So yeah, DE. Let's hopefully the patch comes out soon. Fingers crossed. TennoCon's pretty, coming up quick, so hopefully we'll be able to play the patch before TennoCon. So thanks everybody. Hopefully you're excited about these changes too. Would love to hear any feedback or your thoughts about, maybe the nerfs went a little too far or other ways that you wish they'd buffed primary weapons or whatever. So appreciate it. Thanks everybody. See you around.